Working? Okay. Hi, my name is Nob, and I'm a pastor of this small Japanese church. And we meet at Nailie campus every Sunday afternoon, 2 p.m. So if you're learning Japanese or if you're interested in Japanese culture, you might want to come and check out what we are doing. But we are always grateful for the support you give us to our church. Anyway, let me pray before I start. Dear God, thank you for your presence here today, and thank you that you're willing to speak to us through your words, Lord. God, some of us might feeling tired or sick or exhausted or worried. So I pray that you open our hearts, open our eyes, open our ears, so that we can hear what we need to hear. I pray that you will use me and you will speak through me. I pray those things in your name. Amen. So. Yes. So we have started the new series of First Thessalonians last week, and today we are in chapter 2. But before we start, let me. Uh, did I ask anybody to read the passage? No, we don't. Okay, I'll read it. So it's chapter 2, verse 1 to 12. You know, brothers and sisters, that our visit to you was not without result. We have previously suffered and been treated outrageously in Philippi, as you know, but with the help of God, we declare to you his gospel in the face of strong opposition. For the appeal we make does not spring from error or impure motives, nor are we trying to trick you. On the contrary, we speak as though approved by God to be entrusted with the gospel. We are not trying to please people, but God, who tests our hearts. You know, we never used flattery, nor did we put on a mask to cover up greed. God is our witness. We were not looking for praise from people, not from you or anyone else. Even though, as apostle of Christ, we could have asserted our authority. Instead, we were like young children among you. Just as a nothing mother cares for her children, so we cared for you. Because we loved you so much, we were delighted to share with you not only the gospel of God, but our lives as well. Surely you remember, brothers and sisters, our toil and hardship. We worked night and day in order not to be a burden to anyone while we preach the gospel of God to you. You are witness, and so is God, of how holy, righteous, and blameless we were among you who believed. For you know that we dealt with each of you as a father deals with his children, encouraging, comforting, and urging you to live lives worthy of God, who calls you into his kingdom and glory. So, finally. We are in chapter 2, but before we dive into our text, I'd like us to look at some context. So the letters to the Thessalonians is one of Paul's earliest letter, and so Paul and Silas and Timothy, his team, were working with this church they have founded in the city of Thessalonica, the big Greek city. But before they could even train and disciple this young church, they had to leave because of the opposition and persecution that arose. We could read about that in the book of Acts chapter 17 for those who are interested. So after a while, Paul sends Timothy back to this city because he was worried because they had to leave so quickly. They were concerned about Thessalonians, wondering, did they go back to the idol worship or did they cave in under the persecution? Nevertheless, Timothy comes back with the great news about them. Last week, we have seen in chapter 1, they were actually doing great. They were doing great as the follower of Christ. They became an authentic follower of Christ. So Paul starts his letter by giving thanks to God for their hope, their faith, their love that were growing, that were thriving in the Thessalonian church. But here today in chapter 2, we see there also seems to be some problems in the church as well, though their faith was growing. The problem and the issue that Paul addresses here is that the leadership of Paul and his authority seem to have been questioned by others. Now, in the first century Roman city, there are so many kinds of traveling teachers and fortune tellers. And those false teachers teaches and start their ministry often for their own profit and personal gain. So in this context, where it would be so easy to get cynical about motives, the Paul's motivation for his ministry were also questions. So pretty much they were saying like, his motivation is not right. So therefore, Paul's leadership is not legit. So Paul defends in this passage today himself to those kind of accusation and questions by reminding how he came to Thessalonians and how he acted when he was with them. He's not so much concerned about his reputation here, but the real issue was discrediting Paul and his message would also discredit the authenticity of Thessalonians' faith. So here, he is protecting their faith, and by doing so, he sets an example for them to follow as a believer. So that's the context we read chapter 2. Now, how can you know people's heart? Because Paul's heart was questioned. How can you know people's motivation? I mean, it's hard to tell, isn't it? Because if it was outward action and word, it's observable. But what they are thinking inside, really, it's hard to tell, right? Because you can always do the right thing for wrong reason, wrong motivation. But I think one of the ways you can tell people's heart is that how they respond when they face suffering. So Paul first talks about the suffering he experienced in verse 2. It says, "We had previously suffered and been treated outrageously in Philippi. As you know, but with the help of God, we dare to tell you his gospel in the face of the strong opposition." So just before they came to Thessalonica, they were in Philippi, Paul and Silas. In the book of Acts 16, we read about them being seized, dragged, beaten with rod, and thrown into prison as a result of preaching the gospel. So they experienced the extreme persecution. Now, I don't know about you, but if I were them, if that kind of things happened to me right now, I would be scared. Thinking, maybe in this Thessalonica, I would change the approach. Maybe I'll be more sensitive. Maybe I'll be more tactful and, less out loud about the gospel. I mean, after all, love does not offend, right? But that wasn't how Paul and his team came to Thessalonica. That wasn't their response. What did he say? "With the help of God, we dare to tell you his gospel in the face of strong opposition." In other translation, it says, "We had boldness to declare the gospel." In fact, Paul and his team proclaimed the gospel so boldly, they experienced another opposition. That's why they had to leave again so quickly. So Paul here is saying that in the midst of such suffering, they continued preaching the gospel. They did not slow down. They did not give up. Now, this is one of the ways he demonstrated his integrity. When we suffer, our heart is revealed. When we face hardship, our motivation becomes clear. Motivation is important. Now, when I was young, really, really young, when I was a teenager, I didn't know what to do with my life. So I often asked my parents or adults for advice, what should I do with my life? And they often said to me, you should find the things you love to do. The things that you are passionate about, the things you can spend the rest of your life doing it, even if you didn't get paid. To which I responded like, yeah, but I don't know what I want to do, and I don't know what my passion is. That's why I'm asking. Typical teenager I was. But now, looking back, I see the point of their advice because the motivation is important. Whatever career I choose, it won't be easy because no work is easy, right? And if I'm doing whatever I do just for money or comfort, it won't last. Because when you experience the suffering or trial, you will give up, thinking it's not worth it. But Paul didn't give up. He continued preaching the gospel in the midst of this unimaginable suffering. And it was not just because he loved what he was doing. Although the preaching the gospel was his passion, his motivation came from somewhere else, some different source. Let's look at verse 4. It says, "We are not trying to please people, but God, who tests our hearts." His motivation came from God. He was doing everything he does for God. Now, how about our hearts? How about our motivation? Are we doing everything we do for God or for other reasons? Because this questions of motivation applies not only to evangelism, so preaching the gospel, but to everything we do in our lives. Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 10:31, "So whether you eat or drink or whatever you do it all for the glory of God." Nevertheless, for me, being a pastor, this question directly applies. Why am I involved in full-time ministry? Why do I preach the gospel? What is my motivation? To which I would love to say, I do it for the glory of God only. But to be honest, I think I do have mixed motivations. Paul's motivation was not mixed, but his motivation was pure. Throughout today's passage, it seems Paul is defending himself against basically two kinds of accusation. The first one is something like this. Paul must be preaching the gospel to please people, for the human approval. To which Paul responds, we have already looked at verse 4. We speak not to please man, but to please God. He wasn't doing it to please God, but he wasn't doing it to please man, but for God. Verse 2, "For the appeal we make does not spring from error or impure motives." Paul says his motivation is pure. Verse 5, "We never use flattery." People pleasers use flattery, feel good kind of words. But Paul preached the pure gospel boldly, even if it was offensive to some. Verse 6, "We were not looking for praise from people, not from you or anyone else." He did not care about what people thought of him. He only cared about what God thought of him. Now, what about me? When I think about myself, do I care what people think of me? And I have to say, yes, I do. Now, I'm really grateful for this opportunity that I can preach to you at ABC on several occasions so far. And thankfully, many people have complimented me on it, saying things like, "Oh, I love your sermon," or "I like your illustration," or "You always bring the fresh perspective," something like that. And to which I say, thank you. And yes, those comments have been a huge encouragement to me. And yet, at the same time, I have this nagging feeling in the back of my mind. What if I couldn't produce the same quality next time I preach? Then I would disappoint them, wouldn't I? And as I prepared for this sermon, I struggled. Somehow I didn't know why, but my mind was blocked, or I forgot my English or something, but I just couldn't write it. I couldn't write the notes. So there I was, staring at the blank page for several days, didn't know what to do, stressed, worried, praying to God, please help. But then I thought maybe God is trying to say something to me through this. I felt like he's saying, "Nobu, what is a good sermon? What is a good sermon? Is it the one with a great story or eloquent words or fresh perspective? Why are you even preaching? To impress people? For performance? Or to proclaim my words, God's words, as it is?" Well, obviously, I was trying to impress people. That's why I was stressed. That's why I was worried. Preaching is, after all, not about my words, but His word. So all I have to do is to do my best. And I pray that God will use my poor words for his glory. That was the only responsibility I had, but I forgot about it. That's why I was stressed. I had to remind myself I am not preaching for people's approval. Moving on. The second accusation Paul dealt here is he must be preaching the gospel for money. Pretty simple. He must be doing it to get rich. So don't trust him. That kind of accusation. To which Paul responded, verse 3, no, are we trying to trick you? Paul wasn't trying to trick Thessalonians so that he can get profit from them. Verse 5, no, did we put on a mask to cover up greed? Paul proclaimed our gospel with boldness. He didn't cover up. He wasn't doing it for greed. Verse 9, we work day and night, night and day, in order not to be a burden to anyone while we preach the gospel of God to you. He wasn't getting paid for it anyway. So he worked his hand to support himself. No money was received for his ministry. So he wasn't doing it for money. Of course, nobody preaches the gospel for money, right? I mean, if you want to get rich, who would become a pastor, Maybe a pastor in the United States, a mega church, you might get paid a lot. But I'm a pastor of this tiny, small Japanese church. We only have, 20, 30 people in our congregation? So you can pretty much imagine how much I get paid, a minimum, which I'm super grateful for. So I'm not complaining here. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that because of that, it's safe for me to say, I'm not doing this for money. I'm not doing this for money. Well, not completely true, I must say. I must confess. Because no matter how small my salary is, I'm still getting paid for it. So unlike Paul, who worked for him with his hand to support himself, if I lose my job as a pastor today, I will be in trouble. I have to look for another new job to pay my bill and feed my family. Now, don't get me wrong. Paul is not saying here that the church should limit their provision for their pastors. God, no, please don't. We do need your support. He's not saying that because, Paul actually does receive the financial gift from different churches in different occasions. He's just saying here, in this occasion, he didn't want to be a burden to this young church and wanted to become a good example of hard work. Pastors do need your support so that we can serve people better. But because I'm financially dependent on my church, there's always a temptation. Because love of money doesn't always manifest itself as a desire to get rich, but as a fear of losing it. As you know, I became a pastor this year. So before that, I was a youth pastor. So working with young people, one thing I noticed is that students, they leave. Especially the one who comes from Japan to study here. After they graduate from university, they would go back to Japan. Or those working holiday people, they tend to even stay shorter time, like 3 months, which means those young people don't necessarily give much to church financially. Now I became a pastor, the lead pastor of Japanese church. The idea sometimes, I emphasize only sometimes, crosses my mind. Should I spend more time with families and adults who would stay longer and can actually support our church? To which I came to my sense and, wake up. What am I thinking? No. What? No. I am not preaching the gospel for money. But you can see, because I'm financially dependent on my church, this becomes a temptation. For a small church like ours, financial survival is always at stake. Now, don't worry about us. We are fine. But just in the long term, it kind of worries me. You get the point. So I can say with my mouth, I'm preaching the gospel to please God only. But if I search my heart, if I become honest with myself, I find mixed motivation everywhere. And I must confess that. And I must repent that before our God who sees my heart anyway. What about you? Could you also search your heart? Are you free from the need of human acceptance and praise? Are you free from the need of the comforts and security money can buy? What is your motivation behind your everything what you do? Are you worried? Are you stressed? And may I ask you why? Those are the hard questions we constantly have to ask ourselves because we believe in the kind of God who tests our hearts according to Paul. So Paul has defended himself saying negatively, saying, "No, we are not like those." Uh, yes, that's my son. No, we are not like those false teachers who teach for money and praise. But instead, he says, we are like mothers and fathers to you guys, the Thessalonians. Paul intentionally uses phrases from family relationship because parents care for their children not to get out something out from them, but simply because they love them, right? Now, I have a son. You can see the photo? Yes. I know he's cute. And we love him, and he's 2 years old. But looking after him is a hard work, and most parents would know this. You know, changing the diapers and feeding him and playing with him and taking him to the hospital when he gets sick, and he gets sick often. In fact, he's sick today. He's not here. Um, so last Monday we had to take him to Ascot, and his heart rate was so fast, and he had like 40-degree high fever. So they send us to the Starship, and throughout all week he's sick. So and now my wife is looking after him. So obviously my wife does most hard work, which I'm forever grateful for. But still, being a parent as a father is hard work, and we look after him. Not so that when one day when he can when he grow up, he can buy a house for us and look after us when we get old. Maybe no. We care for him simply because we love him. And in the same way, Paul served Thessalonians simply because he loved them. Verse 7 and 8 says, "Just as the nursing mothers cares for children, so we cared for you. Because we loved you so much, we were delighted to share with you not only the gospel of God, but our lives as well." Paul's motivation to serve the people in Thessalonica was the kind of love the parents have for their children. In fact, his love was so deep, he was willing to share his life with them. Now, when I think about my mother, my mom, she was exactly the kind of person. She was always there for me. She accepted me, was patient with me, and always, always believed in me. And because of her, I knew my home was a safe place. And didn't have to pretend to be anything other than myself, knowing that she will accept me and love me for who I am. We, especially the church leaders, need to learn how to be like mothers, patient, forgiving, and accepting. We have a responsibility to make a church the kind of place where people can feel safe. Maybe not with many words, eloquent preaching or Bible study, but with the listening ears. Just be there for them so that they can share what is going on in their heart, their struggle when they are ready. Now, Paul also says they were like fathers in verse 11 to 12 to Thessalonians. "For we dealt with each of you as the father dealt with his own children, encouraging, comforting, and urging you to live lives worthy of God, who called you into his kingdom and glory." Because being a parent is not just about accepting and forgiving our children, is it? Just as fathers charges their children, we need to be able to challenge and discipline our people in the right direction. Love does not just accept but confronts when they are heading down to the wrong path, the sinful life, destructive way. We love them so much we cannot allow them to continue to that direction. So which type are you? I guess some of you are more like mothers, accepting and forgiving, and the others are confrontational like fathers. We need to, we need both. We need, because children need mothers and fathers. We need to balance both. Notice Paul doesn't say I, but he said we. We were like mothers. We were like fathers. Paul, Timothy, Silas, they were leadership, team leadership. Because you can't do this alone. We need both type of people, not just church leaders, but we, church, all together. We can practice this kind of parents, the love the parents have for their children. So far, Paul have been telling us his motivation came from God. First and foremost, he's preaching the gospel for the glory of God. And secondly, his motivation for his ministry came from the love he had for Thessalonians, the parents' kind of love. Now, let's look at the final point. How then can we cultivate this pure motivation Paul had? How can we do it? Because Paul seemed to have, perfect integrity. How did he get that? I think the hint is found in verse 10. It says, "You are witness, and so is God, of how holy, righteous, and blameless we are among you who believed." Paul proclaims he is holy, righteous, and blameless. I mean, those are bold statements. I mean, especially the last words, blameless, and not only in the people's eyes, but also in the God's eyes. So does it mean Paul is perfect? Well, I don't think he was perfect, because nobody is perfect, right? So what made him so confident enough to say he is blameless in the eyes of God? I think the answer is found in the message he was preaching, the gospel. The gospel. And what was the gospel? What is the gospel? Gospel is this: God accepts us at our worst. In spite of our sin, or in spite of our weakness, he says to us, I love you, I love you, I love you. On the basis of what Jesus has done. Paul's life was so saturated with this gospel, he could see himself on the basis of what Christ has done, not on the basis of what he has done. He was indeed blameless because of Jesus, and so are we. So then, the gospel is the key. The gospel is the key to pure motivation. The question is, do we believe the gospel like Paul did? Because if we do, then we don't need to seek for human acceptance or the security money can buy. We are accepted and loved by God on the basis of what Christ has done. And if that is the case, we have everything we need, right? To believe gospel is to trust Jesus' work on the cross rather than our work. And that's good enough. Do we get this? Do we believe this? If we do, then we are loved by God and we already have everything we need. Therefore, we can serve with pure motivation. More we saturate ourselves with this love of God displayed in this beautiful gospel, we are able to serve and love others with the kind of love parents have for their children. So may you, brothers and sisters, see the gospel is the key to motivation, pure motivation. May you see the love of God we have through the work of Christ is everything we need. May your life be completely saturated with this beautiful gospel so that we can start proclaiming the gospel for the glory of God only. Thank you.